village called Clovelly, which if you ever go to England you should go and visit, because it is built on a steep cliffside and there can't get any cars down. It's cobble streets, and the only way to get goods and services down there is with donkeys with sleds. And I worked in a hotel called the New Inn, which was halfway down. And if you're on the top looking down, it was called Down Along. And if you're on the bottom looking up, it was called Up Along, was the street. It was the only street. And it was an awakening. Because in this country there was a filmmaker in America called Russ Meyer, who made movies of large boobied women. Very famous director. Well, there was another guy in England, a similar guy, who was mostly known for taking nude pictures of women with large bazubas, and everything was airbrushed out in there. This was in the days before the Penthouses and the Playboys. Mm-hmm. But he started to make movies, naturist movies they were called. And he made a movie called Naked as Nature Intended in Clovelly when we were working in the hotel. And the stars of this movie stayed in the hotel. Now, you've got to think, we're like 16 years old.
And you're working in this hotel.
I'm working in the hotel in the kitchens. And there are these models walking around. Ask your parents, Joey. Bras in those days. You remember the Madonna bras with the big cantilevered things?
Volcano things.
Well, bras in those days were heavily wired, big, ridiculous things. These girls were all walking around without any bras. And here we are, 16-year-old kids with these gorgeous girls walking around. We were in our element. We were in, well, it was crazy. But anyway, that was probably the best fun job I ever had.
Okay, so how did you decide to defend criminals and become a defense attorney?
I was an argumentative soul at school.
No.
Afraid so. Just keep dating my daughter and you'll find out. And I didn't get into college. I didn't get in.
You applied?
The educational system, which we might talk about later, is very different. And I applied, and I was told that I had to get 2 A's and a B in final exams. School in England is not based on grades given by teachers. It's given on a final exam, which everybody takes, the same exam. And I took exams in English, history, and French. And I didn't get 2 A's and a B because I spent most of my time playing rugby and cricket and hockey. And, of course, in England there are no such things as scholarships to colleges for sport. It was all based on your academics. And I would have got into any school based on a cricket scholarship, but
of course
that wasn't going to work. So I didn't get into college. But back then you could kind of do an apprenticeship, like 5 years slave labour, 3 of which were literally slave labour, where you got paid nothing to work in a lawyer's office. You worked in a lawyer's office. Whatever they told you to do. And then you had 2 years going to law school, where you took the same exams as somebody that went to college to do law. Mm-hmm. So you ended up taking the same exam, but you'd had 3 to 4 years of practical experience rather than academic experience. Mm-hmm. And that's the way that I did it, and I qualified unusually quite highly. And I was bored with most of law, and I thought the most fun bit would to do crime. Mm-hmm. But that was mainly because I wanted to be set up on my own rather than work for a big practice. So I set up in a town in West London, put my plate up on the door, and the only way you could kind of get business then was to get known for something, you know. And I got involved with doing a lot of criminal defence work, some prosecution work, but mostly criminal defence work. Got involved with the police a lot. We got on very well.
That's always nice.
Yeah, and that's how I didn't make a lot of money, but I loved doing it.
So what kind of people did you defend?
Well, there were some interesting local villains that, you know, were good kids getting into trouble.
Any notorious criminals, or what kind of crimes did they...
I had some nasty rapists, and I had some couple of murders. But I guess the most interesting I had was not really crime, but he was... his name was Maurice O'Mahony. You might look him up, I guess, but he was what was called a supergrass. It was like over here, the mafia. Nobody spoke. Nobody, you know, ratted on anybody.
Sort of like a gang.
But nobody ratted.
Okay.
Until recently, they started to rat. But over in England, if you ratted, you were known as a supergrass. You grassed up the rest of the gang. And Maurice O'Mahony was a nasty piece of work. And he was grassing up, and he was in protective custody at the local police station. That's where he lived. And he wanted a divorce because he'd met this pretty school teacher, and they were bringing her in to have carnal relations with him. He wanted to get a divorce. And I came back from court one day, and I walk in, and there's a policeman sitting there with a gun, unheard of. And turns out that he's got Maurice O'Mahony with him, and because he's from the local police station, and I got on really well with the local police, because I was honest with them and never tried to trick them with anything. There he was sitting there, and you couldn't meet a nicer guy. In fact, we went to the pub, the Barmy Arms, just down the road from the office, and had lunch with him and the policeman that was with him, and he was absolutely charming. It was the life and soul. But you talk to him, and he would quietly he had the coldest eyes. Absolutely, you could look at him, and the coldest eyes. And he would sit there and talk about whose kneecaps he'd shot off and who he'd killed. And it was really quite strange to be with somebody that was fun to be with.
A little eerie?
Eerie is probably a good word for it. But he would say to me, you know, he was told he had to shoot somebody, and the guy had come out of his house with his kids. Oh, I couldn't kill him. No, not with the kids there. Not allowed to do that. You can't kill somebody if they've got the kids with them. I go, well, okay, there's some sort of standard. But he was a nasty piece of work. But they're also kind of the local villains. I remember once I had no money. Got married, I just had a kid, and we were living in this little house, and came back from a weekend away, and the house had been burgled. Not that I had anything, but it was burgled.
What did they take?
Nothing really. I mean, it was, you know, transistor radios, a camera, and that kind of stuff, including an electric razor. And I was in court on the Monday morning, defending again, just a local young villain. And he would say, you hadn't shaved? I said, no, because you buggers, one of you buggers is, the expression is, just turned my drum. I mean, it basically means burgled my house. Mm-hmm. So one of you buggers has turned my drum, and I am pissed. He said, well, it wasn't me. I said, well, if it turns out to be any of you crowd, that's the end. That's the last. I won't represent you again. That's the end of it. And that night, at about 11 o'clock, there's a knock on the door. And there's a guy outside. He's handing all my stuff back. Everything but a small transistor radio.
So the burglar came back.
Came back and gave me my stuff back, because they didn't know it was my my house.
Because they figured that eventually they'd end up in jail and eventually they'd need someone to represent
them. They didn't need me, so they brought it back. There was some sort of logic behind it, I guess.
And you didn't want to, beat them up or anything?
No, it was, but what are you going to do?
Yeah. Well, all right. So, you come to America.
Yep.
Why did you come to America? What was your first experiences like?
Well, I got out. I went from the law into business with a client, and they had set up I guess you would say an IT business, and I joined them, and it was incredible. We had a lot of fun, and it developed into a nice company that eventually went public, and we started to do business in America, and quite a lot of business. We were shipping Brits with IT skills into America to fill shortages that you had.
For working on computers.
For computer programmers, analysts, and software designers. And we had a lot of business, and I was involved in most of it. We had 65 people working in Louisville, Kentucky. 65 people. Because it was easier to get them from England than it was. I tell you, it was easier to get them from Birmingham, England, than from Birmingham, Alabama. So the business grew, and I was asked to come over short term originally to go to New York because we had some problems with the staff there, and
you ended up staying.
And I ended up staying.
An extended business trip?
It was originally for 6 months, and then it became a year, and then we took over some more businesses over here, and that was when I decided to stay.
What was happening during this time that you first came over?
Well, when I came over in '89, and our office was in the 79th floor of the World Trade Center. Wow. And I was living up on the Upper West Side. And my very first experience coming to America was landing at JFK, being told to stay in a hotel out on Queens, and staying in a crummy hotel, and having a meal in the evening, and one of the appetizers was a prawn cocktail, and a prawn cocktail in England, the prawns are about that size, tiny little things. So I thought, well, I have a prawn cocktail. That came out as huge. I'm going, geez, this is
Twice,
America.
3 times the size.
3 times the size. This is America.
There you go. This is America.
But I was up on the Upper West Side, and my first real memory, significant one, was watching the World Series between Oakland A's and the San Francisco Giants.
In the '89?
On the '89 series, when the sitting on a TV in a room in New York watching Al Michaels and the third game, and that was when the huge earthquake hit during the game.
Oh, this was in San Francisco.
The San Francisco game, and that was really kind of eye-opening, and more eye-opening was the reaction of the people. It was absolutely extraordinary how quickly people reacted to it and dealt with it. It was truly, in England that would have taken months, but they were up and at it straight away. It was absolutely eye-opening. And then 2 years later, I just moved to here in Atlanta, and we were having a convention. We bought these businesses, and we brought the different offices together down into New Orleans. And that's when the bombing started in Kuwait. Was that Desert Storm? Not sure which one that was, but it was 91.
Okay.
Bush Sr. declaring war on Saddam Hussein for the first time. And for the first time, seeing it live. I mean, up until then, war was something that happened, somewhere over there. You didn't kind of see it.